Watch this. These guys are sitting here negotiating a particularly challenging Pokemon card trade. And then in the background, a crazy man in a rubber suit descends. And I'm not being facetious here, he is definitely crazy. But let's not disrupt the tone. Here we have two criminals, and the Batman silently descends in the background until he approaches them and treats them very rudely. The thing that caught my eye when watching this again, the thing that made me want to record an entire video talking about the aesthetic of this film, despite seeing it over and over and over for more than 30 years, is this.
I'm Batman.
The way the light diffuses on the edge of his rubber suit. That element is the perfect doorway into the skilled art direction and design on this film, which establishes an aesthetic of Batman in Gotham City entirely unique. Even while Batman films have been a staple of summer releases for 3 decades. So this video is about the aesthetic choices of Anton Furst, Bob Ringwood, and many artists on the Batman production. It's about the way in which those choices fit together to create the color, texture, atmosphere, and philosophy that far exceeds its subject. This video is about the aesthetics of Batman 1989. And so I'm also going to mention here, because people have asked in the comments, I'm fine, I've been here. It's just frequently when things get hectic, YouTube is the thing that has to take the hit. But that does not diminish the appreciation that I have for all of you who take the time to watch. And if you get anything out of it, I'm happy, genuinely happy that you do. Now, before I get too far into this, I do have to tell you this is my favorite Batman movie, the 1989 Tim Burton directed Batman. It is my favorite Batmobile, my favorite on-screen Batsuit, my favorite Gotham City, my favorite Batman movie score, which I will not talk about in this video because I don't know anything about music. And it's my favorite Joker. And I could go on with the list for a long time. But I do want to stress, this is not a video about Batman canon, lore, the story, the production, anything like that. This is art criticism. Digging into the visuals and trying to understand what makes it work. Recognizing that despite being a blockbuster film with connections to all these big companies and brand names, it's a product of the creativity of real individuals. I'm never going to say everything that could be said or even should be said in this one video. I'm going to focus on 4 aesthetic elements that make up the film. Then I'm going to try to understand how they weave together. So if there's anything in here that I don't mention that you think is extremely important to the film's aesthetic, throw it in the comments. I generally try to respond to the first day or so of comments, as long as it's not somebody telling me I'm horrible. But it could start a conversation in there, and the algorithm will eat it up, so like and subscribe while you're at it too. The 4 aesthetic elements that I'm looking at in this video are the city, Gotham itself, the body, the Batsuit's body design, texture, and so on. The Batmobile, really an umbrella for the gadgetry of Batman. And then at the end, I'll talk about the color of the film and how it brings together what I think is one of the most interesting themes from this particular narrative, which is really where I'm going to bring in some conversation about the Joker. But otherwise, let's go ahead and get into it. Look at the city. Gotham in this film exudes tragedy. There are vestiges of a city of grand optimism. Art Deco sculpture and architecture alludes to this world of tomorrow that never realized its utopia, but rather found itself anchored in all of this decay. The city is not marching to some optimistic future as Art Deco as a style attempted to embody. Instead, it's either arrested or regressing, frozen or retreating. In many ways, the Gotham of this film seems more like a new civilization built on the remnant of an older, better, and brighter time. The buildings are dirty, they're covered with soot and grime, many of them are boarded up. The Grand Cathedral at the end of the film is dusty and abandoned, a sign of a more pious and spiritual population now vanished. Pipes and steam interweave the streets, a practical reality where aesthetic is more of an afterthought. The skin and the clothing of much of the city's population particularly those representing its criminal underbelly, look malnourished and ill cared for. Except for Bob. Bob is a stallion. Gotham is shabby and putrid and dense. The light is minimal. You get the feeling from scene to scene that much of the city functions on a bare minimum of light, lit by this perennial vent of steam throughout the city. Which, by the way, when I was a kid, I thought that was completely made up because I grew up out in the country, where I still live out in the country. And then I went to Pittsburgh when I was a teenager and found out that's real. It really does vent steam everywhere. That's not to say anything bad about Pittsburgh. Frankly, I don't remember it that well, but I remember the steam. This is Gotham in terrible need of pruning. It looks kind of like one of those rugs on one of those rug cleaning videos before the purge of the dirt is complete. That being said, unlike your average dirt-caked rug, there's also something very beautiful about Gotham as First and his team built it. It was very wise to put in this underlying element of the optimistic civilization. It provides a note of tragedy rather than simply describing some debaucherous state of being. Fundamental to a concept of tragedy is the loss of something that is good. This means that tragedy acknowledges the existence of good while mourning its absence. Tragedy is grief that is seasoned with hope. It means that the world is salvageable, even if the task seems insurmountable. I think this is key to the concept of Batman, who is barely recognizable as an agent of good. He looks kind of evil. I ask my art students this frequently. I'll show them a picture of something like Batman, and I'll ask, if you showed this picture to someone 1,000 years in the past, what would they think this is? With Batman, the answer is pretty clear. Demon. He looks like a demon. But he is an agent of good who's working tirelessly against corruption in order to overcome it. This makes it feel that the degradation and vice of Gotham City is not a necessary or inevitable state. It can be better. And this optimism is built into the visuals of even the background of the film. And I want to clarify, this is not simply symbolism that I'm talking about. I believe with conviction that you should not place too much emphasis on the symbolic meanings of things within a narrative or within art that are intellectually ascertained. The best symbolism is more of that which is implicit. You really feel it more than you consciously recognize it. Distilling something down into this primal form, so that the viewer can pick up on the idea without consciously knowing it. That's something that is done within all great art. I'm very quickly bored with intellectual symbolism that is just a cognitive puzzle that I'm meant to unlock. But when the work is packed with symbols so universal, then I need not recognize them to have them shape how I understand the story. That's what's happening here, and that is a consequence of great design. Okay, before I go any further here, I have a Greek mythology card game that I designed, illustrated, I created the game, and it's currently crowdfunding. It's a really fun game, it's accessible, it's strategic, and it's complex enough to keep it different and interesting each time you play. I'm really proud of having made it, and I'm trying to get it on the market, trying to make it a thing that people actually play. So, if you like card games, if you like Greek mythology, if you like anything I produce, please go look at it. There's a link down in the description, but I'm not going to keep you too long from Batman, so let's go ahead and get back to it. The body. The Batsuit of the 1989 film is very unique. In the last 20 years, the Batsuit has become far more tactical and militaristic as filmmakers and comic artists have played around with more practical considerations of functionality. You know, what would the suit be like if Batman was using it in reality every day? And during the Schumacher era of Batman films, the suit became very shiny and sleek. Even in the 1992 sequel Batman Returns, the suit feels more produced. The chest plate looks more like armor than the form of a natural body, and it even seems to have a bit more shine to it. Earlier in the video I mentioned that the light hits the suit in a particular way here, and that started my thinking about this entire video. And that's because of the diffusion rather than the reflection that's created by this rubber suit. The light doesn't quite reflect back, it scatters when it strikes. The light plays on the surface of that black suit in a more nuanced way than a shiny suit would allow. It behaves like a textured surface, even a bit like skin. It makes Batman seem a little bit more like his environment, the gritty texture of Gotham City, connecting him with the environment, while some other elements actually separate him from it. Primarily the form of the body itself. The chest plate of this Batsuit is extremely similar to what you see in classical Greek armor. It's a sculpted representation of a muscular male torso. Classical Greek sculpture almost uniformly explored the ideal forms of things. The idea being that the diverse forms of things that we see in the world are a function of chaos, and that there is some elemental constant at the source of that thing. Horses, for example, come in different shapes and sizes, but there is a fundamental form of horse that is the horsiest of horses. The same with a tree or a rock or a human body. The ideal form of the body would be something utterly primal. It meant literally as at the first. Something so elemental and universal that we can all recognize it and its implicit meaning. This particular form of the Batsuit carries this classical notion of man in his essence. There's something very appropriate about the costume associated with this particular Herculean task of correcting the rot and decay of a city that has the potential to be much more. The most immediate cure for the ills of Gotham City is man acting in his most ideal form. And again, I don't think this is symbolism that has to be described or fully articulated in order to be understood. The people of the classical Mediterranean world that included Southern Europe, Asia Minor, and North Africa understood that there's something about the basic form of the human body that is inherently beautiful and inspirational to humans. The body is optimistic both for its utility, this is the tool by which we build civilization, and for its form. The beauty of it, but then also the recognition that we don't possess our bodies, we are embodied. The body is part of us. The body is a part of our being, and its idealistic representations inspire and enrich us. I think this particular Batsuit will always be special, because it carries this old concept of art history into the cinema in the same way that it was carried into the comics. It's probably worth mentioning, too, that idealized forms were a major part of the Art Deco style that serves as the aesthetic substrate for Gotham City in this film. And in a way, it's almost like the embodiment of that former world, but caked with the grit and the fear of the modern Gotham. It kind of represents both sides of Gotham's identity. And that's a connection that's hard not to think of when I watch the film. The Batmobile and gadgetry. The gadgetry of Batman in this film carries a shared aesthetic with the suit. They go so well together because they have a similar texture and a similar form and similar curves. The Batmobile and the Batwing, both of which I had toys of as a child, not to mention the Batjet and the Batcopter, have a very similar design philosophy to muscle cars. Muscle cars are aptly named. They literally resemble muscles on bodies. The lines on a muscle car coalesce but interrupt each other just like muscles do. This is one reason why muscle cars are so iconic. They mimic living, moving organisms, whereas modern vehicle designs tend to mimic potatoes. They do look like very fast, aerodynamic potatoes, and I'm sure that Samwise Gamgee would be thrilled.
Potatoes, boil 'em, mash 'em.
Design a mid-sized SUV in their image.
But they tend not to inspire in the same way as their predecessors. Batman's Batmobile in this film does much more than just mimic the bat aspects, or bat specs, as they're called, of the suit. They mimic the molding and the form of his body that I already talked way too much about. You can see the same thing here. Look at the Batwing. The muscular interrupting lines mixed with the technical tools is iconic in part because of their relationship to the human body, and they frame technology as an extension of that body. Batman epitomizes the way in which we use tools and weapons as an extension of our existing abilities. But they're not surrogates for his abilities. They don't just do everything for him. A big part of the Batman mythos is the idea that he extends his body and mind to the absolute limit of human potential. The technology then serves where he is not capable, but the self-discipline that he has enables him to harness the technology well. You could easily do a whole video just on Batman and the proper role of technology, so I'm going to leave that there. This video is about aesthetic, and I will not be distracted. Yeah, not a lot, anyway. And I want to point out the fact that the visuals of these machines build around the elemental nature of Batman himself. And that's one reason why when you see them together, the suit and the ride, they belong in a way that these designs rarely do, with the exception of Adam West and his Batmobile. That is color. This is a dark and a desaturated movie, but it is not colorless. The color is just used very deliberately and sparingly. Backgrounds typically fall into these deep blues and browns and what some might call overcast gray, but let's be honest, it's just a desaturated blue. You can watch my video on color theory if you want to see me complain about gray. The only real splashes of color we see in the film come from two sources: the intense yellow of Batman's chest symbol and the zany neons of the Joker's costume and weapons and props.
Honey, you'll never believe what happened to me today.
And what I'm about to say here is, again, let me be clear, when I talk about meaning within a film or a piece of artwork, we always have this implication that it boils down to this intellectual symbolism. But again, that's not what I'm getting at. I don't know that there is an intentional intellectual symbolism here. I think there's an implication that I pick up on, and whether or not the creators intended for this to be present, I really don't know, and frankly it's kind of immaterial in my view. Art is a lot of impulse and intentionality, and that saying that you sink to the level of your training is very true. When an artist is acting impulsively, if they're well trained in excellence in their particular medium, their particular task, things tend to get in there that just coalesce with something that's a little bit beyond us, because art is a little bit beyond us. It taps into something that is just outside of our reach. So I really don't view it as subjective. Rather, I think that it insists that art is wildly complex, and frequently things bump together based upon the instincts of the person who's creating rather than necessarily their intentionality. But again, this is not intellectually chosen deliberate symbolism. Rather, it's a pattern that exists in reality that can be noticed even if included almost instinctually. Because when I look at the color in this film, it's so sparing in its use, and the context in which it's used makes me think about this contrast in the film between normalcy and insanity. It seems clear to me in the film that both Batman and the Joker are insane, and the difference between them is not simply a difference in degrees.
And he had a...
Now you want to get nuts? Come on, let's get nuts.
Batman's suit generally mixes with the environment. The color blends into the background, and its contrast is subtle through things like subtleties of the form. The yellow symbol is wildly outside the color palette of Gotham, but it's also highly restrained, just this small part of the chest. But the Joker's colors put him entirely outside the norm. He clashes with Gotham, and his eccentricity, his insanity, is unbridled. And isn't this really the difference between the two of them? Both of them are completely unstable, but the Bat refuses to acquiesce, instead containing his insanity and channeling it into this altruistic force. But the Joker is just appetite unlocked.
You get a new girl, Bobby. Phone book.
Yes, sir.
Unfettered, a total surrender to impulse.
What are you laughing at?
And this is one reason that I love Batman in general. He almost epitomizes this human brokenness, but without foregoing the responsibility. dealing his own pain into aid and help for others, modeling the best of what humans do. And maybe the Greeks were onto something. And that's it. If you like the video, I hope you'll subscribe. But also, I do have to say, when anybody watches something that I made, that's more than I deserve. So I'm grateful for it either way. I will try to be more regular with the schedule, at least for the next few months, where it looks like I've got a bit of runway.